So welcome back to Reimagine. Here we are at the 10th iteration of this conference. So amazing to see how much has changed throughout that time. When we kicked this off, we're at the height of COVID. Crypto markets were only starting their major run up throughout 2020. And yet here we are now at a time where, signals seem to be mixed. If I'd been recording this even a couple of days ago, I would have been telling you that the markets were sour, that crypto was in a full bear market, and that things were looking a little quiet. Maybe a fresh winter was on its way. As of now, at the time of this recording, I don't know if that's so true anymore. And you know what? I think talking about markets, talking about crypto sentiment, and more importantly, talking about crypto community is something that's very important to do right now. So I've got a very special guest right now that I think embodies all of those elements and so much more. Of course, I'm talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, CEO of FTX. Sam, firstly, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so Sam, let's kick this off right now. Again, kick off with a bit of the freshest, the latest, whatever you want to call it, news about you guys, about FTX, and what's going on with you guys right now. So the number to throw out there is $18 billion, the fresh valuation of FTX. Straight up, what does this mean to you? What does this valuation mean? What does it signify? How do you feel about such a number?
Yeah, it's been really cool seeing the growth, of the company over the last few years, and we'd mostly been staying internal to the crypto ecosystem until recently. But as we start to poke our head out, it's really great to get a lot of partners, outside of the traditional ecosystem, and I think that was sort of like the biggest goal of that raise.
Yeah, right. And it is such a threshold crossing, right now. So in that sense, looking towards the bigger space, and I've got a few more questions in that regard shortly, but just to start simple, I mean, what are your next goals, expanding out into the wider space? You go beyond crypto, let's say you've conquered large parts of the crypto world. If you're looking further afield, what are those targets? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think payments is sort of one obvious angle with crypto in tow, but I think, we're also looking at, being exchanged for non-crypto assets. And I think that we've done some of that internationally. I think that we're looking to get licensed in more and more jurisdictions. Um, and and I think that we're also looking to, be able to add our products into a lot of different partners.
Yeah, an important goal, no doubt. But I suppose to get a little more specific and maybe bring up something that has come up recently in your history. Now, the Financial Times recently wrote of you with intent to purchase Goldman Sachs in the future. Now, you clarified that in your tweet, sort of saying that was not quite what you said, but could you clear history there? I mean, is FTX buying Goldman Sachs in the next few years, or what exactly is your sentiment there?
Yeah, no. I do think that we might be making some acquisitions that are bleeding into the traditional financial ecosystem a little bit. It certainly isn't going to be Goldman. And it's not going to be anything that big, certainly. But I do think that we are looking to potentially make some acquisitions, and I think that was a part of what the raise was looking at. And I think some of these are looking at applications that have large user bases and are looking for a technology partner. Um, I think that some of this is looking at companies that have really strong relationships that we can build off of.
Absolutely, but I suppose it brings a lot of the question. And this is, I'm not bringing in a new sentiment here by any means, but a question that comes
Yep.
up a lot in the crypto space at the moment, which is the goal of crypto still, the crypto revolution? Is it the crypto evolution? Is it to replace the legacy financial system, to subsume it, to consume it? I mean, how do you see that role? Getting a little, less tangible here. What do you see the role of the crypto space? Now that there is so much interest and intrigue from the institutional space, how do you see that balance playing out?
I think when you zoom in, some of the barriers between those start to dissolve a little bit, and um, especially when you think about taking it step by step, because you're never going to go from zero to 60 immediately. Um, and I think that sort of the first goal is just figure out how it is that um, you know figure out how it is that crypto can start to interface more. with the existing financial ecosystem, and how it can really spread its user base more. And I think that's step one. Um, and that doesn't need to be the final step. Um, but I think that you certainly can't go from nothing to creating a whole new financial ecosystem you know all at once, because that's not going to be a system that people are used to or able to interface with. And so I think it needs to be able to integrate into just existing systems.
Okay, so if I'm sort of and not to be pushy here, but if I'm sort of to hit you, hone in on a particular attitude that you would have to it, you would say what? It's a bit of a stepping on the shoulders of giants when it comes to building an accessible crypto space that maybe can be adopted by the mainstream. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think that's right. And I think that it has to have ramps to and from existing applications that people can actually interface with it, so that can actually get the funds in and out. It has to have interfaces which are intuitive and familiar for people. And it has to add something that doesn't exist right now. I think that that's right. That like the first step is add something new, move the space forward, without without sort of like throwing out everything that's been done, or forgetting about how the existing ecosystem works or anything like that.
Yes, I mean certainly. I guess people have to be comfortable with making that transition, and I think so much of it is actually not necessarily at that retail user level, but perhaps at the institutional level that brings people on board in that large scale. We saw that with PayPal bringing in access to millions of new retailers and individuals wanting to having the access points to now say, hey, I use PayPal, and now they've got crypto, so now I can use crypto on PayPal, and that opens it up to a whole lot of things. But I suppose history is, and I believe you've used similar words in the past. History is contingent on so many factors, and we saw in 2017-18 in the bull run then that institutions almost got on board, and then sort of got a little afraid as the market pulled back and let that slide for a while. Here in 2021. And it's so interesting because we're still living, and there's still so many elements to it. But as the market has cooled down over the last few months, I mean, are institutions going to retain that interest? Have we crossed the Rubicon? Have we hit that threshold yet where institutions are definitely on board?
I think we mostly have. It's not going to happen tomorrow. These are sort of medium to the long-term plans that institutions have, but I do think that they have mostly decided that they are going to do something in the ecosystem. I think they got a lot further along this time than they did in 2017, 2018. And so, I do think that sort of the cooling off is going to mean that it'll take longer for them to get involved than it otherwise would, but I do think that they are coming.
It's certainly maybe coming, and it's interesting. Even this space is so volatile, and I'm not saying anything new in stating that. That when I was preparing initially for this interview and thinking about questions I wanted to speak about, I was planning talking about how we've had a soured market and everything is looking a bit bearish, and is this a new time for good development? And I wanted to ask you a lot of questions around that frame, some of which is still relevant. But in the last 24 hours, we've seen a massive run up in crypto markets, which makes me think maybe there's still a bit of hype left in this cycle, and maybe a lot. I suppose I wonder, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there is still a bit of life left in this sort of current cycle as we're in right now? And in a more general sense, do you think that sort of energy of new players coming into the market is still alive, or we should start preparing because winter is coming?
And I think that often we split things up into cycles because it seems easy to do so, but
Sure.
I don't think that has to be the case. And you can see cycles bleeding into each other. You can see one coming right on the heels of another. You can see long periods without a clear cycle. And I think more generally, it doesn't have to either be the case that this is one big cycle, or that there's a winter in between and then a second cycle. Anything can happen. And I think that you can have mini cycles, which is just another way of saying that cycles are just a psychological construct that we use to try to make sense of the data we see. They're not fundamentally necessarily meaningful, although sometimes they fit the data well, but not always. And I think in this case, I don't think that it's clear whether this is the same cycle or a new cycle. I don't think it has to be clear. I think that in the end, it is what it is. And, there is a run up, there's some drop, there's a little bit of a run up again, and that's okay. And, I think the world hasn't forgotten about what happened the previous time. I definitely don't think that it's a completely new cycle. Um, but I also think that there was a little bit of time for cooling off. So yeah, I think the answer is somewhere in between, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, the nuance in your answer makes me question, I suppose, are we in maybe a more mature space than crypto has been, in the past? And I guess you could argue by process of time, of course, it's more mature, it's been around longer, but, is there a maturity in this space now that says, hey, we don't need to work in the sense of just, bull run, crash, bull run, crash, bull run, crash. We can start to have a little nuance. We can start to have, more, nuanced movement either side and start to look at this in beyond that certain sort of singular wave idea. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do think that we are more nuanced, and I think we are a little bit more mature. I also think it's always more mature than the cycle narrative made it seem, and that people were sort of trying to overfit data to their priors a little bit with that. Um, but I think that we have seen obviously huge increase in volume, a huge increase in interest and activity, um, more and more diverse types of players starting to dip their toes in crypto. And I do think that that does signal to some extent, a little bit more built out of a system.
And I suppose I wonder how that affects, a company like FTX. You guys have used so much of sort of targeted sponsorships, naming rights deals, things that try and get your brand out into the mainstream. You're not just on the same forums and cycling through the same trade media that so many of your competitors maybe are. You're trying to really break into that wider space. And when you see, these cycles shifting and, maybe things are looking a little more bearish for a little while or something like that, does that give you cause to readjust your strategy, or is it just you push ahead no matter what and, the next sunny days are coming?
I mostly think we're just pushing ahead. Like, I think that if anything, this is a good time to build out. And I don't think that there's any need to to stop trying to grow. And I think that, we're fortunately in a place where we have the flexibility to do that as a company. And so we should take advantage of that.
And I mean, in terms of taking advantage of that, is there something you feel that FTX is doing better than its competitors, that it is outclassing its competitors on, or is it, all things to all people, or different types of elements that you're working on? Would you say there's one singular focus or a widespread approach that you're taking?
I think that there are a lot of pieces to it. But I think we've always started with product first. We've tried to build the best product and then build out from that, and try and grow organically first. Get users based on the product before trying to really supercharge it. And I think we're at the point where we're pretty happy with our product and pretty excited to to start building out the user base more. And so I think that's definitely something that we started on while we are still working on more pieces of product at the same time.
So then in terms of that strategy, I mean, is there anything in particular you guys are looking out for? Any goals, any, either whether that be numbers you want to cross in terms of users or particular strategies you're planning to use without, obviously giving away the full playbook?
Right. And, I think sort of there aren't any really arbitrary cutoffs here in terms of numbers, like the more the better. But, I think in terms of other things, we want to build the products people want. And I think, part of that means building out more types of products. And I think that, that's something that we started to do internationally, something we're working on in the US as well. And I think that means looking at building a more integrated financial product where people can access a lot of different types of products all at once, and in a way which feels natural.
Absolutely. But, I suppose, and, it's all good to talk about, feeling natural and trying to get sort of that natural sort of idea into the way the community may grow. But I think, and this is a good segue to think about that sense of community. How well do you sort of feel the cohesion in the crypto space really is, that you're getting that natural growth? In a space where so much is built on word of mouth reputation, where so much is built on this idea of, one good review from a user anywhere in the world can do great things, but one bad review can ripple out across a whole ecosystem. How do you feel you're sort of primed for that natural growth?
I mean, that makes it a lot easier to grow naturally, certainly in this space, because it means that if you can give users a great experience, that will travel. And so I do think that means that it is a lot easier to get non-paid growth. I think that's super important. I think outside of that it means that when we start looking more broadly at the world, we do have to try different strategies, and we do have to try to reach tens of millions of people in a way that word of mouth alone is not going to get.
So when sort of like projecting out to those wider circles, as you say, like you can get that word of mouth to a certain degree, but like exactly as you say, that's got a limit, right? Not everyone is going to be able to tell every other person, and not everyone's grandma is going to listen to the grandson or whatever. You need at some point to like, whatever it be, whether it be hitting mainstream advertising, you had like the sort of somewhat viral ad campaign of something like Grayscale a while back, the Drop Gold campaign that seemed to cut through a lot in the mainstream. And there are various times like that when ad campaigns from crypto or certain ideas from crypto are bled into the mainstream. But I suppose I wonder, like, what do you think is a winning strategy in that sense? Do you think you can explain the crypto story to a mainstream audience, or do you need a different tactic when it comes to moving that broad?
Oh, I certainly think you can. I mean, I think everyone is very curious about it already. I think when you combine in a naturally 24/7 market with instant deposits and withdrawals, a natively built GUI mobile app and API that are free to use for everyone, I think all of that is a really compelling picture of a product that you just don't see in the rest of finance. And I think that combines with a lot of the natural excitement that people have around crypto right now.
Okay, so you'd say you think that actually the products almost sell themselves. This is a product market fit that just it's filling that niche that exists there anyway. Would that be fair?
I think that's a part of it, but I also think that to the extent that the message is something that's important to get to people, I think it already has. I think that like that has been traveling on its own for the last few years, and especially the last 9 months, and that people are pretty primed right now to be willing to look into a crypto product and excited to do so.
So and that's a sort of a great point to my next idea that I want to hit on as well, which is what is the salience of a lot of the issues that the crypto industry is trying to deal with? Because on the one hand, I'd say if we look, I'm talking small timeframes here, but if we look the last couple of months, people have sort of, crypto, obviously most people on the mainstream focus on Bitcoin. It hit its high, 64,000. That was cool, but it's fallen off a lot. If you made some money, great, but a lot of people weren't in there early, so fine. But something that I think's really come to salience right now, and something that I think people are very aware of, is inflation, right? Inflation is something that I think a lot of people are thinking about now and thinking, hey, my savings are being inflated away, and this house I wanted to buy is now double the price, and this lumber I wanted to buy for a little DIY home project is now 50% higher. What the hell's going on? Why is my money worth less and my wage isn't increasing? Hey, maybe there can be a transition to crypto. I mean, what is the salient issue to you? Is that inflation there? Is it sustainable? Is it an issue people are actually going to focus on?
I do think that there's and it's a good question, and I do think obviously inflation's been a big piece of the narrative, and I think rightly so. And I think that people have been looking for for harder currencies because of that, and that's been a big narrative in the direction of crypto. We're gonna have to see what happens going forward, because some of this was somewhat specific to COVID, and now maybe COVID's going to keep going, in which case maybe this whole narrative will keep going, right? But I also think that we're going to have to see if COVID does wind down, what happens with that narrative when less short-term stimulus is necessary for the economy.
Right, and this is something like inflation, I feel, is a bit of a generational divide here. Previous older generations, sort of our parents' generation, perhaps, were very aware of the inflationary runs of the 70s and 80s and they're around, and there was a lot of concern that inflation's a real issue, but I feel like, for those who've grown up in the last 10, 20 years into financial maturity and sort of seen a low inflationary environment where lending is relatively and borrowing is relatively cheap, and they can get access to cash flow pretty availably.
Yep.
Their prices haven't gone up in a long time. They don't know what it means for prices to really go up. It can be hard to get that message across. There's still that sort of sticky mind mentality of, oh, this is what something costs. What do you mean it goes up in price? That doesn't make sense. Obviously, I'm talking country specific. I've got friends from Argentina who live in a very different world. But in sort of the States and in the sort of the Anglosphere, let's say, that inflation hasn't existed for so long.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think that a lot of people have been paying attention to that, and I think frankly for a lot of people, even if you don't see the direct inflation, you see some pieces of that are particularly stark. There's a lot of bespoke weird asset classes that have been massively increasing in price over the last few years. I think that like for a while Bitcoin was viewed as one of those. But I think you see it in a lot of other areas which are becoming more and more part of the national conversation and the global conversation. And I think people are sort of like aware of that, and maybe even in a way that like banana prices aren't necessarily as prominent in the global discourse. But when you look at sort of anything from like given goods for rich collectors, to looking at what the scale of budgets of nations are, to and bailouts, to looking at how some of the biggest companies are doing, and looking at the scale of trading and investing on in terms of impact, especially from retail. I think there are a lot of numbers that have been getting bigger in a pretty prominent way over the last few years.
Right, certainly. I mean, the classic example, of course, is we were talking about $900 billion in the global recession back in 2008 for a bailout, and now suddenly we're talking in the $4 to $6 trillion
exactly.
in this current. I mean, that's it. The order of magnitude has just exploded, right?
That's exactly right, and I do think that that's like, I basically think that's like, something which is really clear and prominent to people, and I don't think that people are sort of like, I don't think people are going to be are sort of like surprised by the overall narrative, in part because of that, because there's something so prominent that is so clearly pointing in that direction.
Right. So then, I mean, let me ask you the straight up question: with these numbers inflating, with these sort of warping of sort of economies at all scales, whether we be talking from
Yep.
Pokemon cards to government bailouts, so many soothsayers and doomsayers will say, the big crash is coming. Just wait. It's all inevitable. This is unsustainable. What's your take?
It might be, it might not be. I mean, it's sort of a boring answer, but I think you look back to like the 2000 tech bubble, so to speak, and I think that there are a lot of people at the time who felt like that was sort of a sign that things were overheated, and certainly in some ways, and in some in some cases they locally were. But if you've been calling that a bubble the whole way up, you have been right at the top, but you would have been way more wrong your whole right. Then you're right? Like you have whiffed so many times. Things ended way higher than they started, and in fact, they're way higher now than they were pre-crash.
Right.
And so, I think it's one of these things where, like, after pops, people always talk about how obviously inflated things were, but of course they missed that, like, on the way up.
Right.
People are saying the same thing, and I think you see that a little bit with crypto now, where people talk a lot about the crash from 60K to 30K, forgetting about the run up from 10K to 60K in the first place, as if were crypto just to be a mature, stable asset, everything would have been great. And I think that's just like, that's not the reality. The reality is that like there's a lot of price discovery left for it. No one knows what the fair price is. And you can't go up if you never go down. Um, and and that people are sort of trying to have the good without the bad.
Right, a bit of a cake and having a cake and eat it too sort of situation.
Yeah,
as you say, where people don't want to see the growth, but don't want to sort of bear the consequences of that. And I guess, I don't know. I mean, maybe is that a reflection? And I want to sort of pull back from institutions and think more about that sort of community retail sort of idea again. Something you mentioned earlier sort of tweaked me, which was that you said that the sort of COVID awareness of what's going on and inflationary salience and all these sort of things was something that I think, for a while there, I don't know if it still is sort of hip to say this, but was called a retail revolution. And, everyone sort of getting in and doing a lot of, couch trading and sort of in a retail sort of way. I sort of wonder, are those the guys most at risk in this situation? The ones who, rode some sort of, as you called them, what was it, bespoke, weird assets sort of, up the line and now sort of leverage beyond the point where they might end up hurting themselves and, might end up in sort of a long-term financial ruin. Is that who we're concerned about? Or we're more concerned about the institutions doing it? And what are the sort of impacts from those different markets?
I don't think there's a lot of clarity on that. To be clear, like, I basically think that like, both when you look at retail and when you look at institutions, there's some that made a lot on the way up. There's some that lost some on the way down. And I don't think that there's a very clear narrative there. One thing which I think is sort of true here, which was maybe less true in past markets, is that retail has been playing a role from the beginning. I think that there used to be sort of, that there used to be this sort of sense that that it was all institutions until the last minute when retail would get involved and then sort of end up basically getting picked off at the top. And I think one unique thing about this is that there's retail from the beginning, and retail made a lot of the money in the run up. And so I do think that this was a much more diverse and a sort of much more balanced market cycle in that sense.
Okay, so if anything, I mean, some called this a distorting of markets, and this is not how markets are intended to be used. And there was a lot of that narrative running around, particularly if you were to read sort of, the financial media in particular. But you're actually saying in your mind, this is actually a rebalancing of a situation where retail maybe, had their day in the sun, as is sort of right. Sometimes institutions get it right, sometimes retail gets it right. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's becoming increasingly true, because I think increasingly there are ways for enough retail traders to join together online that they become as large as some institutions are.
Okay, the informal hedge funds of the future that are based off varied Reddit forums and the like.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a brave new world. That sounds a bit of fun to be a part of, I guess.
Maybe
a new financial tool.
Pros and cons.
Yeah, until someone takes advantage of it, as they inevitably
Yep.
do. All right, so I'd be remiss at this moment if I didn't ask you. I've got you, here for a conversation. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. We've just seen the likes of Bezos and Branson rocket off up into space recently. You'll represent the sort of the new technological crypto billionaire. When are you taking it off into space, and who are you bringing with you?
I'm scared of heights, so I don't know about that
one. So no big plans to ride the FTX rocket anytime soon?
No, it sounds pretty terrifying.
All right. What do you think okay, so then a more speculative question, I guess, without involving heights, obviously, what do you think that the new crypto billionaire does in comparison to this? So you've got the sort of these guys riding rockets into space to sort of show they're pushing the barriers of new frontiers. What's sort of your version of this?
Donating.
Okay, all right. I guess that is probably a lot more in line with with a lot of the action that people seem to want, right? Like people see, there wasn't a lot of great press from the sort of the retail investor space, as it were, when it came to those sort of actions.
I think it started off exciting when it was just Elon. I think when it came to the point that there were like, three people competing for it, I think the narrative soured quite a bit.
Right. Then it seems to become, it goes from like a one-off cool event to like a bit of a trend. It's sort of like, wait, where are these billions going? Being shot off into, it's literally turned into vapor and blasted off into space.
I think that's right.
So then, okay, looking at the donation space, is there anything in particular in your eye line at the moment? Obviously, you've got varied and many causes that you've been known for donating to in the past. Is there anything in particular you're looking out for? Any industries you feel really need to see some of that more attention, more love, more care, whatever it may be?
And there's a lot of things that we're doing there, and I think one is we're looking at the climate space, both for offsetting our impact and for doing more, but I think that's only one piece of it, and ultimately, I think the answer is whatever has the most impact on the world.
Okay, fair enough. And I guess I'll ask you one last question in that regard. You were, sort of made headlines for being, the biggest donator to the Biden campaign back in the 2020 campaign. Do you feel that investment paid off?
Yeah, I do.
Fair enough.
I think the data backs that one up.
Okay, nice. Well, good to see an investment that bears fruit. I think that's the most important thing you can do. All right, Sam, I always like to sort of end these interviews with, a bit of a last word on the future, and sort of, whether it be a personal project or a general project, or a sort of wider scale focus that you're thinking of, but sort of projecting ahead over, you pick a period, the next year, the next, 6 months, the next 5 years, whatever it may be. What is it you're most looking forward to? What is it you're most looking out for? What is it you're most excited about?
I think certainly developing regulation is like one of the biggest narratives in crypto right now, and probably will remain so. But I think outside of that, like just continuing to really try and build the product base and the user base a lot. I think this is our time to really try and grow a ton, and hopefully we do a good job of it.
Mm-hmm. An absolutely noble goal, no doubt. Growth, development, getting more people into crypto. I think that's a fair goal for any respectable company in this space. Sam Bankman-Fried, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. A pleasure speaking to you, and look forward to seeing where things take you next.
Thank you too.
All right. For those watching, make sure you stay with Reimagine. So much more amazing content still to come in this conference.